Okay, guys, we're going to get started. We're going to start with the briefing. I see Linda Lamone, our State Administrator of Elections, and Nikki Charleston, Deputy Administrator of Elections. Why don't you all both come up here? And again, unfortunately, we do have a busy day here. I know you had a longer presentation that hopefully we can truncate a bit given where we are this afternoon. But I'm going to let you start, Ms. Lamone, and Nikki, you can weigh in, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Kagan, members of the committee. Linda Lamone, State Administrator of Election. Say it's a hard act to follow what I have here, but I'll try to make it as exciting as possible. Thank you very much for having us today. Before I give you some of the information from the 2022 general election, I'd just like to generally provide you with how elections operate in Maryland for some of you that are new to the process here. We have a state board of elections, 5 members, 3 of the governor's party, 2 of the minority party. I know the governor's working on finding new people to serve on that. Their terms start July 1st. We have about 45 employees at the office, and they are organized by topic or assignment. So for example, and I'm the chief election official for the state by law. Lucky me. This is Nikki Charleston. She's the deputy administrator. We have Melissa Dorsey here. Melissa's over there in the corner. Melissa is assistant deputy for election policy. Donna Duncan, a lot of you know, she's not here. Assistant deputy for project management. We have a director of budget, personnel, and finance. Candidacy and campaign finance. Jared is here somewhere, and you all know him because you have to file your campaign reports with him. And then we have a voter registration division, a technology division, election reform and administration division, and we also have an administration division. And just to let you all know, this year I've asked Jared and Jennifer McLaughlin, raise your hand over there, to be our principal people over here to answer any questions or get whatever you all need. So where all the rest of us are available, but they are our main point of contact. Then here in Maryland, as you all know, because that's what you deal with, we have our local boards of elections in each county. They're the face of the election here in Maryland. The board members, like the state board, are appointed by the governor. They have full-time staff from 2 to 30 people, depending upon the size of the organization. We always ramp up their efforts with temporary help come election time. And then I want to say that they do the yeoman's job. They're the people that the rubber meets the road and get things done. So anybody that talks to your local election director or staff should give them a big hug. Figuratively, not literally. Thank you. Then lastly, we have the Maryland Association of Election Officials, MAO, and they will have a presence down here before you all during session to let you know of any concerns that legislation how it could impact how they run their operations. Election administration in Maryland is unique, literally among the states. In most states, the counties or the towns are the ones that decide what's going to happen and how. They pick their own voting system. They probably pick many of the other things that they do. In Maryland, it's the exact opposite. The state controls virtually everything. We pick the voting system. We pick the voter registration system. We make the policies on how elections are supposed to be run, and this is all by law. We don't do it in a vacuum. We work with the local boards of elections to make sure that we have their input and get their concerns and suggestions incorporated into what we do. There's a lot of benefits to centralization. There's the economies of scale. There is the uniformity across the state for the voters' experience, which is very important. In the old days, when you moved from one county to another, you had to re-register to vote, and you may have an entirely different voting system that you had to use. So back in the late 90s, the governor and the General Assembly decided that we wanted to have a different model for Maryland. So I'm going to turn it over to Nikki to give you a few points on where we're going, what a couple things that have happened, and answer any of your questions. No.
Thank you. Just wanted to highlight a few initiatives that you all passed in the last couple of years that we implemented for the 2022 elections. The General Assembly in 2021 adopted considerations for where to locate ballot boxes as well as early voting centers. And so the 2022 election was the first time that we implemented those considerations. We worked with the local boards to map their proposed locations and then overlay the considerations that you all adopted in the law. It was also the first election cycle where we had permanent mail-in voting. So this allowed voters who wanted to vote by mail, they could ask for a ballot for a particular election, or they could say this in all elections forever and ever. So we implemented that, and we now have almost 400,000 of our voters on that list. So that means that they will automatically get that ballot for every election that they're eligible for moving forward. And they returned their ballots at a little bit higher rate than other voters, and their acceptance rate was just about the same. We know we have some more education to do with the voters on the permanent mail-in ballot list. We had over 13,000 voters who were on the list that did not return their mail-in ballot and voted in person a provisional ballot. So we are working to figure out how can we best educate those voters so they understand what they signed up for and what that means. And then obviously, if they decide they want to vote in person, let's get them off the permanent list. Excuse me. We also implemented a cure by text pilot in the primary election in Montgomery County. We used a software solution to allow for voters who returned a mail-in ballot without signing the oath to provide as an option their signature via text. And we had 17 out of 78 voters who provided their missing signature that way. Last month, we issued a full report on our 2022 general election. It's available on our website. I'm happy to distribute it to Stacy and you all, and without having to go through all the statistics unless you'd like me to. But the report is thorough and provides all sorts of numbers from turnout to use of ballot marking devices to provisional voting to mail-in voting, all the way. It takes throughout the entire election process. Would like to just highlight a few things. So the ballot boxes, we had about 50% of our voters in the general election return their mail-in ballots that way. It ranges widely by county, but statewide it was about 50%. Our turnout by mail is continuing to grow. It's much larger than it was before the pandemic. It was about 27% of our voters voted by mail in the 2022 general election. So we're starting to see a trend. We'll probably need another election cycle before we can determine what is the trend line. But it certainly looks like it's going to stay much higher than it had been before the pandemic. We had a statewide voter education campaign and are very pleased with how we were able to target direct messages to distinct populations. It wasn't as much money as we had hoped, so our ability to do TV and radio and print was more limited than it had been in 2020, but certainly our digital campaign was extensive, and there's lots of data in the report on that as well. After each election, we do a comprehensive post-election audit process. Some of them are going on now. The local boards are finishing up their manual audit now, where they take a sample of ballots, hand count them, and then compare them to the voting system. We do a complete audit before the local board, before the state board certifies of all of the ballot images, so we can make sure that the voting system results, we verified them before we move forward with certification. In terms of enforcement action under campaign finance, we have limited enforcement powers for certain offenses, but in 2022, we received 418 complaints, and 213 of them went to civil settlement, and we collected almost $60,000 in fines. So these efforts are certainly keep the Candidacy and Campaign Finance Division busy, also collecting late fees on late reports, and collected almost $250,000 on those reports. Those money go into the Fair Campaign Financing Fund. And so right now that balance is about $7.8 million. And so with that, I'll turn it. Did you want to go over what's coming up?
No.
Okay. And so we're looking already planning for the next election. It feels like we haven't even finished the last one. And here we are talking about 2024 already. So the big effort this year is implementing new electronic poll books. Those are the tablet-like devices that our poll workers use to check you in to vote if you vote in person. And the vendor is currently customizing the software so it can work for us. And we've ordered a whole bunch of equipment and expect the tablets to be arriving shortly. And then we'll be working with the local boards to do extensive testing so that we can confirm that they're ready for us to use next year. And so that the focus is on the poll books this year, and we will likely be required, as we're happy to do, to provide quarterly reports to the legislature on the status of that project.
And with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Okay, here, I'm going to just throw one and then we'll go to Senator Watson after that. The issue of the ballot marking device, I guess more and more people are using that rather than pen and paper, which is a good thing. On the other hand, it seems to come up when we have crowded ballots, you know, where if you're past candidate 7, you have to you go to the second page. And, you know, if you're a candidate for office and you're stuck on the second page, I think most folks would probably think they're at a big disadvantage politically in that spot. So my understanding is there is potentially a fix where you could fit 14 names on one page rather than the current 7. But that it would be expensive. How much would that kind of fix cost if you have that information?
So that would require an upgrade to the voting system itself. So updating the software on all of the devices. And the estimate we have was from a couple of years ago when we looked into doing that, and it was almost $1 million. The current voting system contract ends after the 2024 election. So that after the 2024 election, we will be procuring and implement a new voting system for 2026. So it would be doing that upgrade for one election cycle. And that quote was from a couple of years ago. So I don't know whether it would be significantly higher or lower now.
Okay, Senator Watson.
So glad you all are here. So I have just 2 questions, and they're pretty simple, but you know, when I first was able to get my ballot online, I assumed that everything was online. Even though I filled it out online, still had to print it out, mail it and everything. Is there any effort to try to make everything totally online where you could press the button and have it be submitted? That's my first question. And then the second question is, those of us who were in politics for a while, we know the games that are played during election. My question is, candidates' names are always put in alphabetical order. Has there ever been a consideration to randomize that? We've seen folks change their names, add hyphens right up to election time. Absolutely no. Oh,
You
Malcolm
never do
Augustine,
that.
that's right. But just curious about that.
Well, first of all, on the electronic voting, Senator, we are prohibited by mail to accept voted ballots back electronically. So the law would have to be changed. There are movements around the country to allow that, especially for our military and overseas voters. I don't know how many states are doing it, and most of them are restricting it to that section of the voters. And I know that the Department of Defense is also allowing the military people to return their ballots electronically, and then they forward them on to the states. So, but the basic thing here in Maryland is it's against the law. The ordering on the ballot is also dictated by law. So it would have to be a policy change. He's not going to support it. So it would have to be a policy decision among you and your colleagues. You're welcome.
Okay, Senator Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lamone, Ms. Charleston, thank you for all you do. And as you said, huge shout out to the rest of your team and to all of the local board members who work really hard for crazy numbers of hours and for their staff. So I have three questions and that probably won't shock you all. So why don't we do them one at a time? So first, we had about a 50% increase in the number of provisional ballots, people who showed up during early voting or on election day. And for any of various reasons, were not able to cast a ballot. And so they had a provisional ballot. And I'm defining it just so, and you guys can define it better than I can, but just to make sure that anyone watching online knows what we're talking about. But their ballots are not automatically counted. They're kind of put separately. And then only after investigations are done that person's ballot may or may not count. So the bottom line is huge uptick. And there are different categories that you all have looked at. Can you talk about what that is and whether you have thoughts as to how to address it? Because obviously casting them takes more time for our judges and for the voters.
Thank you for the question. So a couple things. So I know that so we're seeing people, as I mentioned, people on the permanent mail-in list, and others that just asked for a mail-in ballot, they are showing up in person to vote. And so I think that's just, we're going to do some outreach to permanent mail-in voters so that they understand what are your choices and this is the result. So hopefully some of these efforts will pay off. I think just as voting by mail becomes more familiar with people, they'll be less likely to show up. There are differences in the reasons provisional ballots are issued in a general election than they are in a primary election. Primary election, it's mostly because they don't have a ballot for that election. They're not eligible to vote in the primary, but want to, or they are eligible, but want a different ballot, which is, well, it's either the D's and the R's going back and forth, or it's unaffiliateds who think that they can vote and they get there and all they have is a school board and then they want to vote another party. So there are different reasons in different elections. And I know that you have a bill introduced that tries to address the primary election bill. That is pretty constant over time. The primary election numbers and how the party issue is pretty constant over time. The general election, because we've seen an increase in voting by mail and it's new, the number of voters getting a provisional because they've already been issued a ballot is higher in response to the increase in voting by mail.
And it's a safety net.
Yeah, and it is, right. So it is a safety net that we want to make sure we continue to offer, right? It is more time for the voter, more time for the local boards, but it is a good way to make sure if there's any question as to whether someone can vote, that they do get to vote. Thank you.
Be curious to know about how we can educate folks that if they did say mail in for forever and ever, how we educate them, because I think that's important. And if we can do it in more than one language, I think that would be great. Second question is about internet delivered ballots, and it's a challenge. And Senator Gallion and I had a wonderful colloquy about that last week, and others had interest. It's hard to explain to legislators. It's hard to explain to voters. They think, as Senator Watson says, oh, well, I'm just going to be able to click. I shop online, I bank online, I date online. Why can't I just vote online? And then they learn that it's really complicated and very time consuming. Can you just, for the record, talk about the challenges that internet delivered ballots pose for the voter as well as for the boards of elections? And do you have any thoughts about how to reduce the numbers so that we don't have those levels of challenges?
I think it's important for everyone to understand that the genesis of this ballot delivery system is to enable our disabled voters to vote. And we are required by federal court decree to offer it to at least those folks. And then it was a policy decision of this body, the General Assembly, to offer it to every voter. So it's not that we are somehow promoting it or whatever, but it has to do with the ADA and the policy decision of the Maryland General Assembly. It is time consuming for the local boards to process and canvass these ballots. We are hoping with a new voting system that is mitigated to a large extent, so that the reason is that we get the ballots back on paper like this, and our current voting system requires paper that's thicker, and before it can count the votes, and it needs the timing marks on the side So it's not a simple thing. I don't know how, other than that we already warn the voters that it's more time consuming. We can't guarantee the secrecy of the vote if they vote that way. I don't think I can speak for you, but myself, I am not in the position of discouraging people from voting. So that would be my major concern with any effort to scale back on this program. Do you have anything you want to add?
Clear, in no way was I accusing you guys of discouraging anyone from voting, and the way you described it and the way I described it, very similar, except it's just infinitely onerous and a huge challenge, and something I think we all want to address, while allowing our people abroad, people with disabilities, people in the hospitals, sudden need to travel personally, or grandma just died or whatever. We certainly want to maximize the number of Marylanders who are able to vote, and to make it easy on them. The last question I have is about the voting systems. SBE, the State Board of Elections, is coming to the Board of Public Works next week with a contract to extend by 1 year. I guess, can you talk about what it is you're doing? Nikki, you mentioned after the 2024, getting new systems. Can you talk about that? And I know you also had a conversation at the last or 2 Board of Public Works meetings ago with our wonderful new state comptroller about making sure that the new systems, their new voting machines are going to be compliant with ranked choice voting. Not that that's a mandate, not that we are guaranteeing that, but if there are local jurisdictions that choose to start looking at or implementing RCV, that our new machines would be able to accommodate that. So if you could speak to our new machines and the taxpayer money that we are looking to invest in the short term and the longer term.
Well, we have no idea how much money it's going to cost because we have not put out any kind of procurement. The current lease, as you noted, expires, has 1 more election to run. We need to extend the lease or we won't have any voting equipment for 2024.
Right. So that's coming up before the Board of Public Works next week.
Correct.
Okay. And then after that, when are you putting out the request for proposals for after the 2024?
We're not permitted to discuss the procurement at this point.
Not even a rough timetable
2024.
after the 2024 elections.
I didn't say that. I said 2024.
Okay, I'm sorry. Nikki, I thought you said after the 2024 elections.
So after the 2024 elections, we will have a new voting system. We will be implementing a new voting system after 2024 for 2026. We just aren't permitted to share our procurement schedule so that people don't have an advantage if they're hearing this. I can tell you that the implementation timeline for implementing the current system is we implemented that in 2016. And in December 2014, we presented the contract to the Board of Public Works for approval. So that was the timeline we did for the last one. But the timeline for procuring this one is we are still waiting approval for DO-IT to approve it as a major IT project. That's our first step. But the exact timeline for when we're issuing an RFP, we aren't allowed to share.
Okay, and could you speak to the RCV component of the question, please?
Sure. Yeah. So we are certainly aware of everyone's interest in ranked choice voting, and that will be something that will be in the RFP to gather information so we can understand each possible systems and how they handle it.
Senator Simoner.
Thank you. I have a lengthy question. Not really. First, I wanted to give you a shout out. I know this body passed the Election Day Page program. I know in Anne Arundel County it was very well received, and they did a tremendous job. So I just want to thank you for that. Nikki, you mentioned curing. There was a pilot program in Montgomery County or something. Was that in the primary or the general or both?
Just the primary.
Just primary. And you said, what were the numbers? How many?
I think it was 17 out of 78.
17 out of 78. And I think we had a pretty close race, like 32 votes for the county executive race. So how long did the voters have a chance to cure after the election, or did the timeline? Because literally the curing could change the outcome of that vote.
So with your permission, Jen McLaughlin was
Sure.
the primary point of contact for
She was the
this.
cure person.
She
Yeah.
was the primary point in the primary election.
Hi, thank you. Jennifer McLaughlin with the Maryland State Board of Elections. In Montgomery County, as soon as they received ballots back that were mail-in ballots in envelopes without signatures, they, in all counties, I believe, do try to contact those voters immediately and give them options to cure, which is sign the oath. So previously, those options included come into our office, email.
How long did they have a opportunity to cure it?
The ballots must be cured by the 10 days.
10 days after the election?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the policy as far as you reached out one time? If they didn't respond, did they reach out again? I mean, how
Well-
did they do that?
Well, so not every person who didn't sign their oath got the option to text, because not every voter we had a mobile number for. So, you can't tell them, maybe they were told, but they're not texted that option. We communicate as best we can with voters through mail. Mail doesn't work after an election. It takes too long to tell them you need to do something in 10 days. But if we have an email, we email them. If they have a text, we texted them.
And every voter received just, the requirement for us was one notice.
Yes.
One notice?
Mhm.
Okay, and then maybe we can talk offline. I'd be curious of those numbers of the 78, how many actually were reached, or they didn't have an email and they weren't reached. Because of, you have 78 potential votes that could have been cured. You had a very close race where it could have changed the outcome. And if half of them weren't reached because of X reason, it's a big impact. So if I could just get that follow-up information. Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for our panel? Okay, seeing none, that concludes our briefing from our State Board of Elections. Thank you for coming in. I do see Senator Bidle here, who has a very short bill with only one witness. We're going to try to get her in here and out of here quickly. Senator Bidle, we're on Senate Bill 321, and your designated witness is Mark Bedell from the Anne Arundel County Public Schools.
I'm looking for
Is he-
Dr. Bedell.
Mr. Bedell,
He
here?
is our brand new superintendent.
the superintendent's,
Okay. Well, I put this bill in at the request of Dr. Bedell, so maybe
Okay.
he'll come in. I think he knew to arrive around 2:30, so my apologies. So, Mr. Chairman, it's great to see you as chair of EEE and your vice chair and all members of the committee. Thank you for hearing Senate Bill 321. And for the record, I'm Senator Pam Bidle, Anne Arundel County District 32. So thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 321. This is enabling legislation. It would really allow our school boards in any county to change how they calculate the time needed in school. Instead of just 180 days, it could be 1,080 hours for elementary school and 1,170 hours for high school if they choose. This is not a directive. It is enabling legislation. In some counties now in the country, around the country, they're having a little bit longer school days, so they don't have to go quite as long. For some areas, it might mean that they go into trimesters and do, basically a summer session. But that would be up to the superintendent of each county, along with their boards and their teachers association and whoever they have to work with. This is already being done in 15 states, according to the National Center of Educational Statistics. So currently, the state law requires that public schools be open for student attendance for both 180 days and a minimum number of seat hours during a 10-month period. Minimum number of 1,080 hours, as I said, for elementary school, and 1,170 student seat hours are required for high school. The bill removes the requirement that public schools be open for student attendance for a minimum of 180 days during a 10-month period, but leaves the minimum number of seat hours required in its place. This change is necessary in order to prevent local school systems with the flexibility to tailor instructional programs and school operations to innovate, I can't say it, best meet the needs of their students, but does not diminish in any way the requirements regarding instruction provided to students. I want to emphasize again, this bill does not mandate that a school system alter current operations in any way, does not reduce instructional time for students. What it does provide is local school systems much needed flexibility, and I respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 321.
Okay, thank you, Senator Bottle. Any questions for the witness as is this your no, I was looking for your superintendent still to show up,
That's not him.
but, okay, looking around. Pam, just look around, make sure one of the gentlemen walking is not your superintendent of schools.
This is my superintendent.
Okay,
Dr.
Mr.
Phil.
Superintendent, we have located you.
Perfect timing. Come up. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're on Senate Bill 321 and you've been designated by Senator Bottle to explain why we need to pass this bill.
All right. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We just came from across the street. First of all, let me just pull this out real quick.
The superintendent, because we're in a tight schedule here, we've got a lot of bills behind you. You're going to be limited to 2 minutes, unfortunately.
Okay, sure thing. Yeah, so we'll start off by just saying thank you all for having us here
And
today.
restate your name for the record.
Oh, I'm
Now
sorry.
we're being zoomed out.
All right.
out loud.
Mark Bedell, Superintendent of Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So I want to thank you all, Senator Feldman, members of this committee. Thank you for allowing us to be here today. I serve as Superintendent of the Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I'm in my 7th month as superintendent in this school district. I come to you with 6 years of superintendent experience from the Kansas City Public School District. I'm here to express my strong support for House Bill 510. The passage of this legislation is a top priority for Anne Arundel County Public Schools during this Maryland General Assembly session. I also want to thank you, Delegate Jones, for your collaboration on this matter. As Jones may have stated, this bill will remove outdated and artificial constraints in law that hinder local public school systems when developing the school calendar each year. I think one of the nearly universal agreements about education in Maryland, and also I would argue across the country, is that we need to be more innovative. We are rigid and we are outdated, and we have permission to do so because we get guaranteed funding every single year. If we were Blockbuster, Circuit City, Service Merchandise, or Kodak, we pretty much would either be obsolete or non-existent because we have not evolved with the times. The blueprint for Maryland Futures is all about innovation. And this bill will allow us to truly support that bill. It's important to understand that this bill does not force any school system to do anything different than it does now. It does allow for flexibility to do things like eliminating early dismissals that are a source of nearly universal consternation among students, families, and staff. It allows for us to have flexibility to add minutes to the school day and actually potentially shorten the school year, thus creating a longer summer opportunity for our kids. Most importantly, it allows for us to offer flexibility to meet the needs of our unique communities, eliminating this cookie cutter approach that we continue to operate under.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Senator Augustine.
I appreciate what you're saying, sir. How do you deal with, I mean, at least in my area, I mean, a lot of our kids, they get fed at school. I mean, I'm struggling with what you're saying as it relates to some of my children, the kids that I represent and what the school and that day means to them.
Yeah, I don't think it would be any different than what we did during COVID. I mean, if we are finding ourselves in a situation where, let's say you were to work with a part of your community that says we're interested in exploring a 4-day week, right? Then we would still work with that community to provide food for those families if we know socioeconomic status is a major issue. But even if you think about maybe looking at a trimester type calendar, we believe the same would apply in how we would support our families that may be in a situation where there are days off with a trimester calendar where they may be off during the month of November. The vast majority of those children are going to be in school anyhow, receiving interventions. Because part of the reason why we're trying to do this is to ensure that we have value add and that we're not placing our students in further harm who are already behind. But at the end of the day, I would think that it would be no different than what we were doing with COVID when we didn't have students in front of us. We still fed them.
Okay, Senator Hester.
Thank you. I was just looking at this bill going, is this a local bill? Is this a statewide bill?
Statewide.
Fabulous. We've actually talked about this in Howard County. But I never had the guts to put in a bill like this. So, but my question is, can you tell me how many other states do this? And do they do it as a whole state or do they do it county by county?
Yeah, so I just moved here from the state of Missouri, and Missouri is based on an hour system. When I worked in the Houston Independent School District, Texas is based on an hour system. So during my time in Houston, we had a program called Apollo 20. And what we were able to do was to go and work with legislators like you all to extend the school year by 2 additional weeks, extend the school day by 1 day for the 20 lowest performing schools in the Houston Independent School District. And then we were able to work with Harvard Ed Labs to provide the best tenets of successful public schools around the country and charter schools, applying it in those 20 schools. It also resulted in us having teachers that were interested in working in that model, because part of the negotiation process is if you're given a longer school year, you have to make sure that people are also being compensated for a longer school year. So we did that there. And then in Missouri, 4 years ago, under my leadership, we created the middle college program, which serviced 17 to 24-year-olds that dropped out of school. We put them on a college campus. We gave them a flex schedule very similar to what college students would have, but because we had the hour system, we had the ability to really offer them a unique schedule that allowed for these students to be able to have their second chance to matriculate through getting their high school degree if they were 21 and under, and they're over, they get their GED. And it boasted an 83% graduation rate. That program is vibrant right now. And because we had this type of flexibility, we were able to do things like that, to think outside the box to service our students.
Mr. Chairman, can I add something?
Absolutely.
Senator Hester, thank you for your question. This is done in 15 states, but it's done by school system. So in our state, it's by county. And it would be up to each county to decide how flexible they want to be. Thank you.
Okay, any additional questions for the superintendent or the sponsor? Okay, seeing none, that concludes the bill hearing on Senate Bill 331. We're going to next.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to have to do a quick 5-minute reboot for the committee, and then we'll take Senate President Ferguson next.